What's going to be featured a lot today is the uproar, the worldwide uproar caused by the French Revolution and its aftermath. And to get a little bit of a feel for it, I think it's worthwhile thinking a little bit about the preliminaries, what gave rise to the French Revolution and its progeny. Voltaire used to end every one of his essays with a little phrase in French, crush the infamous thing. Just like Cato the Elder used to end all of his speeches in ancient Rome with, no matter what it was, he could have been talking about building an aqueduct, but he always ended with Carthage must be destroyed. Taking a cue from that, Voltaire would say, whether he was talking about powdered wigs, okay, he'd end the thing with crush the infamous thing. Well, the infamous thing was the church. And in the radical French revolutionary tradition, represented by those that that really thought that the church was something that was just an archaic thing that was holding everyone back, the church was what had to be destroyed. And so we're going to talk about as they built up power in the late 18th century France and in the early 1800s, they were going to fulfill that wish of Voltaire, who died before the revolution broke out, but whose spirit lived on, particularly in the most extreme members of it. And so what we're going to see, the story that we're going to talk about today, is something that if it wasn't true, you'd think it was some kind of a fairy tale. I mean, there's so many different things that happened. We are going to just really scratch the surface about the different things that happened during this time. There's so much more that we can talk about, but we're going to particularly focus on their efforts, the efforts of the opponents of the papacy to truly wipe it out once and for all at this time. This was the plan, okay, crush the infamous thing. This is an actual cartoon from the revolutionary period. You see a parody of the Pope with papal documents coming out of his mouth, being burnt at the stake himself. Okay, that was this is not from a history book. I mean, this is from a pamphlet at the time prepared by the French revolutionaries. That was their mind and desire with respect to the church. But God daring and the laity to the rescue. Okay, and it's kind of summarized by one of our family's favorite movies, The Scarlet Pimpernel. Justin, can I have a seat, please? And this will give you a little flavor for La Révolution.
And family.
There they are! I beg of you, monsieur.
Fear not, my son. If you'll look at the passages that I have marked, your spirits will be uplifted.
It is not for myself I fear, Father, but my wife and the boy. They have done nothing. They are innocent.
Innocent? Ha. Show me one aristo that is innocent, and you can spit in my face.
Surely the child is too young to die.
Even so, he will live on, through the mercy of our Lord. Look here, my son.
Take them away! The former Marquis d'Eteret.
There he is!
We've come to help you. This way. Quickly.
Be brave, my darling.
Okay, I wanted to show this because there's a lot, even though it's a fictional story, it's and despite the fact that it's one of our family's favorite movies, there's a lot of truth to this in what the role of ordinary people, ordinary lay people, laymen and women had in countering this in defense of the faith, okay, all over the place. There were a lot of heroes in this thing, and the church was intimately involved in it, as we'll see. Some of the clerics were the so-called non-juring priests. We'll hear about these as we go through. The Western French Catholic resistors. There were a bunch of people in the west of France who had an uprising against all of this bloodletting, and they weren't going to take it anymore. We'll hear about that. They were especially in the Vendée and in Brittany. They formed something called the Catholic and Royal Army, a counter-revolutionary army against the revolution. There were also Italian Catholic resistors. I love them. They were led, encouraged by Cardinal Ruffo of Calabria, my homeland, okay? They were called the Sanfedisti, okay, the Holy Faith people. And also the Archbishop of Siena got involved with it. He helped drive the revolutionaries out of central Italy. And of course, our heroes again in Malta. Several hundred years later, they rise to the occasion again and drive the revolutionaries out. We'll hear about them. And in Spain, okay, this time Spain, extremely Catholic. They have what they call their War of Independence, and hopefully we'll have time to hear a little bit about it. And in fact, where the Palafox was one of their leaders, it's the first time these little army men, these kind of citizen armies, are called guerrillas, guerrillas, little wars, and they did it. This was in reaction to a radical revolution against Christendom, as we talked about with Voltaire. Later, in the early stages of the revolution, they wanted. Actually were somewhat inspired by the first new nation, our own nation, the United States. They wanted to have a liberty as in a liberal sense, but extremists early took control and put the revolution in a much more violent and much more antisocial direction. And one of the things, again, that they wanted to do right away was wipe out the influence of the church. So in 1790, the French National Assembly drafted something called the Civil Constitution of the Clergy, which abolished papal authority in France. This was a document that was made to be, part of the law of the land that was going to really keep the church alive, but keep kind of like a Chinese puppet church, okay, where the church was going to be beholden to the state. Here were some of the elements of it. First of all, the so-called independence of the French church from Rome. Now, all of it, look what always happens when they declare an independent church. It immediately becomes under the thumb of the civil power. The Byzantine Empire starts off, we want to be independent of the rule of Rome, okay? And so what happens is the Byzantine Emperor controls everything in the church. Well, that was followed later on by all kinds of people, all the way to the time of the Russian czars. And of course, Henry VIII being a perfect example, where the independence of the church really meant its evaporation, its subservience to the secular power. All church property would be nationalized. I mean, this is something that is repeated time and time and again through history. They take away the churches, give them in the hands of the government, and they run it. And they'll let you use it if they feel like it. All dioceses are redrawn by the government. All the historic dioceses of France, some of that go back to the time of the Roman Empire, gone. Now they're going to be divided as though each congressional district would have a bishop. That's the way France did it. All clergy were to swear allegiance to the new system, and the clergy were to be salaried by the state. Religious orders, of course, would be abolished. No more, Dominicans, Franciscans, Carmelites, out. And the bishops were supposed to be now, because this is the land of freedom, elected. Okay, they have it in quotes, because guess who does the electing? Whoever the party in power says is to be elected. And pastors are also to be elected. Okay, and of course, only people who are going to be qualified as determined by the government are even capable of being elected. And here's the results of this new church. And as you see, this also is a cartoon of the time. And you see all kinds of particularly religious orders being displaced. People they taking the property, gobbling them up, and using it for secular purposes. more results of this separation of the church from Rome. Only 8 bishops become quislings. Only 8 bishops sign on. Okay, most of the bishops of France refuse to go along. However, about 45% of the priests take the oath. 45% of the priests do sign on, and those that sign on receive a certificate, and they're called the juring clergy. Jure is part of the word for oath in France. And of course, there's a schism in France because this other 55% don't take the oath. They become, by that token, enemies of the republic, enemies of the state, and they continue, though, to do, many of them leave France. Some of them are driven out of France. Many are executed, and some exist in the underground. And they're called the non-juring clergy, but also the bon prêtre, the good priests. Okay, so they're the priests that go along with the government, and then there's the good priests. Okay, who, especially in the West, they love them. Now, Pope Pius VI is the Pope. His name before he became Pope was Braschi. Okay, Cardinal Braschi. And he is outraged by all this. He tells the French, this is unacceptable. You're separating yourself from the Church Universal. So we're excommunicating all the bishops that go along with the oath. Now, some of the bishops that go along with the oath are pretty famous people. Talleyrand, the famous Talleyrand, started out as a bishop, but he takes the oath in favor of the government, and ultimately the things get more and more radicalized. A lot of the bishops and a lot of the juring bishops and the juring priests, the ones that go along with the government, end up going along with the government as it gets more and more anti-Christian. And the radicalization is such that first they want to separate the church from Rome, then they want to get rid of the church completely because they said this is all superstition. We want to have a temple of reason, a church based on reason. And so the royal family is executed. Louis XVI loses his head, and so does Marie Antoinette. And a reign of terror, which we saw a little bit, begins to take place, where people who are denounced as not being sufficiently in favor of the Republic end up losing their heads. And there's a committee they always have great names for these things. Public Safety, okay, the Committee of Public Safety decides who is not safe to have around, okay? And away we go. I mean, most of us probably in this room would have been riding in those tumbrils along with some of the people. This is how radical they were. Even the old-time Julian calendar, the Gregorian calendar, was too religious as for the taste of the new government in France. What they wanted to have was a revolutionary calendar where they threw out the old calendar. They threw out the weeks of the year at first. Okay, they divided the months into decadi, okay? And so from now on, instead of a 7-day work cycle, there would be a 10-day work cycle with the 10th day, rather than the 7th day being the day of rest, to screw up the Christian calendar as much as possible. So no one would know when Sunday was, no one would know when any other day was, and the months are completely different than the ones that we have now. The snowy month, frosty month, warm month. This was the official calendar, and the year 1 now was not going to be 1 AD. The year 1 was going to be the year of the foundation of the Republic. And finally, they declared the abolition of Christianity, okay, as a force in France. No more allowed, okay. What we're going to have now, the Temple of Notre Dame is now going to be the Church of Notre Dame, Cathedral of Notre Dame is now going to be a temple of reason. We're going to have ceremonies honoring reason rather than all these superstitions. The government is a radical kind of committee that is set up by what's called the convention. Okay, there's a radical convention. The Paris Commune sets up all these different things. There's various forms of government that take place during this unstable revolutionary period. And this reign of terror is taking place under what's called a commune. The strongman of the commune is the infamous Maximilien Robespierre. Okay, and Robespierre is one of the ones that he calls himself the incorruptible. And he, even though he's a little bit squeamish about all this stuff about God because he himself believes in some kind of a God. He's a deist, but there are people that are more radical than he is that want the Christians wiped out. All right. Well, fighting back is when this is going on. And by the way, this begins the process of Catholic emancipation. Okay, in England, because a lot of the refugees go across the Channel, and the Brits take them in, and they see these priests and nuns. Are just nice people. They're ordinary people. They're not causing anybody any harm, and it begins to diminish the anti-Catholic animus against that had taken place in English society ever since the Gunpowder Plot. But a coalition forms against them of Austria, Prussia, and England. And guess who's also involved with this first coalition is Pope Pius VI. He says, you guys are right. I think these people should be stopped. Well, when this war begins against the Republic, a draft is instituted along with the terror. So now it's not enough just to use the standing army. Now we're going to have to take people's sons, out of the farm or out of the house or whatever it is, and start going to fight in a foreign land in an area that they don't really understand why this has to be. And this starts creating an uprising in Catholic West France. And one Sunday they just said, we're not going to take it anymore. Long live the king, and long live the good priests, and we're going to fight to restore Catholicism, the good old church that we always belonged to back in France. The center of this rebellion is in a department called the Vendée, Vendee. And so they're called Vendéans, even though along the Bay of Biscay, especially all the way up to Brittany, they've got a giant army. They get actually within 60 miles of Paris before they're defeated. To defeat them, like every other tyranny, they use terror tactics. Okay, they're sending they're picking up arms against us. Let's kill their kids. Let's kill their homes. Let's kill their wives. And so blood is called for the commune as being the way to stop this. Well, in addition, they to make sure that the Vendéans aren't helped by this coalition that we talked about before, the revolution decides we better export the revolution to other countries. If we beat them, they won't be able to get us. So they started invading Belgium, and they take it over. Italy, okay, they got through northern Italy. And here it is. There's a map of the revolution on the march. Here, of course, is the original France in 1789. Okay, kind of pretty much the same situation that we have today. But the green areas are areas that they took over. This particular area was Avignon. Okay, was part of the Papal States. They grabbed that. They took over Belgium. They pounded Holland into becoming a puppet allied state, and they started invading northern Italy, and they ultimately got all the way to Venice and wiped out the Venetian Republic, which had existed since the 900s AD. France's new military hero was this man. You could recognize him, perhaps. He's Napoleon. Okay, he came from a lower class background of the island of Corsica, but he was a enthusiastic military genius in many respects, and he had joined the revolution, and he was the principal victor in a lot of the battles, particularly in northern Italy. A classic and consummate kind of realpolitik type guy. He's going to do whatever is going to be necessary to make himself on top. He's going to take the advantage, and he's going to be able to wheel and deal and change alliances at the drop of a hat. Now, Rome, the title of this is Rome is first stirred and then swallowed. Okay, they're kind of after Rome. They want to get it. In fact, the French government at this time, the reign of terror ultimately stops. A new government of 5 people called a Directory is in charge. Some of the people on the Directory are vehement anti-Catholics, and they tell Napoleon, we want you to go and attack Rome. We want you to take Rome out. It's got to be gone once and for all. It has too much historical power. We won't end the old regime until we end Rome. So originally, Napoleon has a bunch of victories for the French there in northern Italy, and he signs a peace treaty, actually with the Papal States. He said, they want me to attack you, they want me to take you out, and I probably can, because Swiss guards can only go so far. We'll do it, and we've got you cut off now from the Austrians and the Brits and anyone that can help you, and so we offer you a peace treaty. And we'll take the northern corner of the Papal States, okay, kind of Ferrara in that area there, Romagna, in the Marche, the northern part of the Marche. But we also want a bunch of money. You know, you've got all this money from all the thousands of years, from 1,800 years of donations and so forth. We want several million to fund our French army, and we want a bunch of artwork too. And so the Pope really is over a barrel, and he said, all right, to save Rome, to save central Italy, we'll give you that. Now, the French also say, as part of the deal, we have a right of intervention, because we've created now a bunch of new liberal democratic republics, okay, in northern Italy. All these old dukedoms and principalities are gone. They're now different kinds of republics. And, Rome is an anomaly. I mean, it's still ruled by the Pope, the Pope. So we have a right to intervene if all of a sudden you get too frisky, because you were a little frisky, too frisky earlier when we were trying to create a republic in our country. Well, ultimately, Pius VI is captured. They assert this right of intervention after they took all the money, after they took the artwork, and when Napoleon actually wasn't there, there was an incident with some of the Italians, doing some resistance work against French troops that were in the area. The French said, okay, we're going to have to intervene. We're taking Rome. So they go in May of 1798. The Pope is about 82 years old. They grab him right out of the papal palace, and they take him out there, and they say there's no more Pope. From now on, there's a Roman Republic, just like in the old days of Cicero and Catiline. And now, that's what's going to rule Rome, and, the papacy is gone. They proclaim the Roman Republic, and the Pope is caged. They take the aged and debilitated Pius VI to France. But a very, very strange thing happens. As they really, literally, kind of like, special forces, they burst into the papal palace at night. They grab the Pope, although he's waiting for him. He knew they were coming. He's dressed in his full, white, cassock and everything else. He's ready for them. But so they take him away, and the people, the word travels fast in Italy, as you know, okay, particularly by word of mouth. And so as they go through the various cities, people start lining up in the streets to cheer for the Pope, to throw flowers in his path, to boo the French troops, and to create a big uproar. And that the French are losing kind of a lot of popularity, because people really think it's pretty darn outrageous to take the Pope, who's been in Rome since the time of St. Peter, and take him away. The exile becomes a triumphal exile. All kinds of people, actually, laying down in front of the coach. They don't want the Pope to leave, and the French really don't know how to deal with it. They start just shooting all these people. It's not going to make them look like the Friends of Liberty, Fraternity, and Equality at all. And so they've got a real problem. So they take him to a city in southern France, in Provence, called Valence, okay, and he's there. This is horse and buggy time, okay. So he's got to cross the Alps and everything else, and it's pretty tough, okay. The Pope gets sick, and actually they're kind of happy about the Pope getting sick, because they said now if he gets sick and dies, they'll take this popularity off our hands. And what people actually do is they come to this kind of church and rectory where he's kept prisoner in Valence, and they all come out. They call for him. They want to see him. From the French people, the Provençal people, want to cheer the Pope. They want to see him on Sunday. And at first he's allowed to come out, but it becomes another very hot tamale that they can't swallow. And so finally they keep him literally in. There's no more going out to wave to the crowd. I mean, that's out. You just got to stay put. He gives a last blessing as his illness is getting worse and worse as 1799 goes on. So he's in jail for, he's under this kind of house arrest for quite a while. He gives the last blessing. As he realizes he dies, he gives some last prayers, okay, that he smuggles out, that he wants people to know what his last prayers are. And on August 28th, 1799, Pope Pius VI dies in Valence. Okay, and the newspapers, and there's newspapers at this time, announce, according to the decree of the Directory, this infamy has finally been crushed. The papacy is over. The last pope has died. There will be no new pope. And we've spoken to the Roman Republic. There is no one allowed to come to Rome for any of these crazy meetings that they've had where they've oppressed people all these years, these conclaves with the cardinals and all their red robes. None of that is going to happen. It's over, folks. That's all, folks. And the announcement is the last pope has died. And, you know, people kind of believe it. Actually, his prayers, his last prayers, are smuggled around. People read them. And here's what his last prayers were. His last requests to God on this earth. That peace would be restored to Europe. That all of these revolutionary wars would stop. That the young men would stop being drafted and sent into wars against their fellow man in Europe. That Catholicism would be restored to France. And that the popes would be restored to Rome. Well, let's see what happens. The See of Rome is vacant. Okay, there's no pope at all in Rome. But the Roman Republic, as I mentioned, bans the papal conclave. Oh, and to make it even worse, to kind of crush his nose in it a little bit, they said, you know, we don't want any burial of this pope, of Pius VI. You know, we're not going to, we can see what happened when we're too nice. You know, people start coming out and cheering for him. We don't want there to be a demonstration here, you know, in favor of the Pope, all kinds of people crying when he's buried here in France. So we're just going to leave his coffin in this, you know, remains of the church to rot. Okay, let it just stay there. And then when they see that, you know, there not only is no Pope, there's no even a body of any Pope, maybe they'll start thinking wisely and support the Republic. But what happens is the word gets out. Guys, go to Venice. Come to Venice, and you know, we'll have a conclave there. So the cardinals, at first secretly, began trickling into Venice, which had been occupied by the Austrians, who at this time are against still part of, you know, still licking their wounds after having been defeated by Napoleon and the French. They've occupied this corner of Italy, the ancient Republic of Venice, and they said, sure, you can come here, but keep it on the QT. You know, I don't want you to meet in St. Mark's or something like that. We got a lot of little islands here. You pick one of them where they got a monastery and, you know, have your conclave. And after about 3 months, there's a sufficient number of cardinals that arise, and the word gets out from the Church of St. Michael, actually, in the lagoon of Venice. We have a pope. Habemus Papam. We've elected another one. Who is he? He takes the name Pope Pius VII. So we killed Pope Pius VI. He was the last pope, ho, ho, ho. But no, a new guy's up here, Pope Pius VII, and there he is. That's the picture of him. Cardinal Chiaramonti. He, as you can see, his amiability kind of sparks right off the page. A moderate guy, very much, you know, a mild-mannered person, not somebody who's going to be shouting off fire and brimstone all the time. He's no enemy of democracy. When he was a bishop in northern Italy, when the French troops came in and when they set up one of these ersatz republics that they created, and basically he said, look, there is no necessary contradiction between democracy and the church. Okay, democracy is a form of government like any other, as long as, you know, basic people's rights as human beings, the rights of their soul are respected. Democracy can be a form of government just like any other. So go ahead and go along with a regular government. If they don't create any trouble for us, we won't create any trouble for them. He had been a Benedictine monk, okay, and he was a kind of a mild-mannered monk. He was actually stationed in Rome for many years at the monastery of St. Paul outside the walls. A holy guy, you know, and a very spiritual man. Not, you know, quite humble, okay. As I said, big-hearted, and a people person. You know, he was someone that, you know, liked people, and when he was made a bishop, the people liked him. He was kind of a hands-on bishop, and one that was not pompous at all, but one that was very much a man of the church and a man of spirituality. Now, Catholic resistance is a big problem, particularly in northern Italy. You know, all of this stuff is not going down well with our paisans, and especially in Calabria. There's and I'm proud of him for this. Cardinal Ruffo said, you know what they've done? Okay, they've made these crazy, you know, revolutionary democracies all over the place. And now they've even taken over, southern Italy, the Kingdom of Naples. And guess what? We can't take this. Okay, we don't like them, making fun of our religion. We don't like them, calling us idiots and stupid people. Okay, we're gonna bring southern Italy back to the way it was, and you guys can go ahead and do it. And so they. Cardinal Ruffo, who's a fiery and enthusiastic speaker, and with a good Calabrese hard head, he blesses a group called the Sanfedisti, okay, the Holy Faith Men. Okay, and they said this is like the Vendée, except it's in southern Italy. They're going to fight to get rid of the Voltaires of the world influencing their country. They're going to take it back and make it great again. So the French are expelled from Naples. Okay, this rebellion catches on. And our paisans, really, get victorious first in Calabria, then up through the boot, then they throw them out of Naples. And Naples, which had been made a republic by the French Revolutionary Army, they called it the Parthenopean Republic, brought back the old Bourbons at this point. And Naples goes back and forth. It's a very strategic area, so the French don't want to let it get away. But at this moment, they expel the French from Naples, and they open up Rome. They recapture Rome. So. Meanwhile, the same thing is going in Siena. Okay, another guy, Archbishop Zonderari, okay, starts encouraging the men up in Siena and other areas to take the cross. Okay, fight to keep our religion going. Fight to be able to go to mass. Fight to be able to go to confession. And Malta uprises too. Malta, Napoleon had on his way to Egypt, where he was going to make a name for himself there. It didn't work too well, but he landed in Malta. He took it over from the Knights, and for 2 years, they created another Maltese republic. But now, the Maltese, even now, okay, have one of the highest church-going rates in the world. Imagine what they were like back then. When they start closing the churches and secularizing them, they said, that's it. Oh, no, none of that. So the Maltese, joined their buddies across the strait in Sicily and Calabria to throw the French out of Malta. So Napoleon sees this and he decides, you know what? This is stupid. Okay, the Directory, the French government, is really getting out of line here. They're making enemies for us where we don't really need to have them enemies because of their religious policy. And so Napoleon does a number of very interesting things. He goes and visits Valence, okay, and where the Pope is buried, and he said, this is too much what they did. This is way out of line. And in fact, people are crying to him. And this is general. Look what they did. I mean, they're letting the body of Pius VI just rot here. I mean, this is outrageous. You wouldn't do this to a dog. I mean, this is the Pope. So Napoleon actually again does this on his own without authorization from the Directory. He says, no, this is too much. He's got to be given a proper, holy Christian burial. I authorize it. I've got the army right here. Go ahead and do it. And so they have a great big, Catholic celebration, Catholic Requiem Mass for the Pope. They bury him for the time being in Valence. And ultimately, and he also does a number of things. He sets up a coup d'etat and ultimately gets rid of the Directory and makes a government of three consuls, and he's one of them. And he makes himself first consul, and the most important one. And there he is. And here's a picture of him as first consul and all his regalia. The Pope, meanwhile, the new Pope, Pope Pius VII, decides, now that he's got a clear path to Rome, so he comes back home to Rome, sweet home. And in June 1800, he returns in triumph to Rome. And, it's the greatest celebration, since the Italians won until the Italians won the World Cup. I mean, he was just, everybody, was so happy that he was back. Let's face it. That's what makes Rome the eternal city, and so there he was. And the first consul also sends word to the Pope. He says, "Look, I think that these other guys went way too far. I think that we got to make a deal. Catholicism is under a cloud here in France. We're going to." Give you religious toleration, and actually, let's face it, the Catholic faith is the religion of the majority of the French people. So let's make a deal. And he also returns the body of Pope Pius VI to Rome for burial. And another big Requiem Mass takes place. And everybody comes out, and Napoleon is looking like it's time for some God talk, because this is a... And so what does he say? Here's a statement from a leader at the time. He said, persuaded that the Catholic religion is the single one able to provide the true happiness to a well-ordered society and to strengthen the basis of a good government, I assure you that I shall endeavor to protect it and defend it at all times and by all means. I declare to you that I shall consider anyone who makes the least insult to our, and the emphasis is mine, our common religion, or to your sacred persons, as a threat to public peace and enemy of the common good, and will punish as such, be punished if necessary by death. So he's saying, hey, no more knocking churches up. I mean, and who says it? Napoleon himself. Napoleon issues that in northern Italy. That's going to maybe do a few things. Calm down the Sanfedisti, calm down the resistance in northern Italy, let them accept French rule, and also maybe calm down these guys that are still fighting in the Vendée. So he tells the Pope, we're going to make a concordat. Here's the beginning, the proposed beginning of the concordat. The Catholic religion, Roman and Apostolic, shall be freely followed in France. Its practice shall be published. So this is the peace treaty, it's called a peace treaty between the church and the state. It's called a concordat. Its practice shall be published, but there's some fine print. Conforming itself to the police regulations, which the government shall judge to be necessary for public tranquility. So the big picture, the big lines are good. Freedom for the Catholic Church. You can teach kids at school again. You can have seminaries. You can appoint the bishops. Okay, this will all be fine. But of course, you're going to have to obey the rules that we're going to set forth. What are the rules? We'll tell you about them later. Okay, you'll know it when you pass the bill. Okay, so he invites the Pope to Paris for. He decides, hey, this consulate of three is a joke. I'm the boss around here. France has taken over all these different countries. I ought to be an emperor. So to be an emperor of the French, you only recognize as an emperor, like the Holy Roman Emperor, when you're crowned by the Pope. So I'm going to invite Pope Pius VII, my new pal, to come to France, to come to Paris to crown me in Notre Dame Cathedral. Now, there's a few problems, though, with the coronation Mass. First of all, this is a Mass. Are you in the state of grace? Your Holiness. I wonder a little bit about that. And Napoleon says, well, gee, one of the things I'd like you to do, if you could do me a favor, my brother, fell in love with an American girl out of, Maryland. And, now that I'm an emperor, this guy is kind of, important in diplomacy. I'd like that marriage annulled. So, he can maybe marry some princess here, and we can cement, the throne, and have allies all around. Pope says, no. And also, Josephine says, Holy Father, when it comes to the state of grace stuff, we're not married. We only had a civil marriage, and we never went to a priest or anything, And so, and really, she's a smart lady, okay, Josephine, because she knows Napoleon, would sell out anything, change. She knows him well, okay. So this is marriage insurance for her, because she figures, okay, if he gets married, okay, inside the Catholic Church, guess what? No divorce. I got him. So Napoleon is furious with that, because now he's been outflanked both by the Pope. The Pope will not annul his brother's marriage. He will not participate in the coronation unless he's properly married to Josephine. So he says, all right, well, let's do a quick religious marriage. I'll have my uncle, who's a bishop, a cardinal now, and a priest, to do the marriage very privately, no big deal. And the key is, we're going to do this. We're doing it for you, but we don't want you broadcasting it around. Okay, this is just a private thing. I'm doing it. Okay, I'm doing it. But don't be blasting around. There's going to be no rice being thrown. There's going to be no champagne bottles. Okay, but we'll do it so we can have this coronation Mass without any problem. And Napoleon's revenge is, he's going to, the Pope is there, okay, when it comes time for the coronation, he keeps the Pope waiting, just to show who's boss around here. And, of course, as we all know, he changes the ceremony around. Instead of the Pope crowning him, he takes the crown and crowns himself, okay. He takes the crown out of the Pope's hands, puts it on himself, says, I made myself emperor, you're not making me any emperor. You're here, you're witnessing this, but I'm the emperor. And Napoleon then also crowns Josephine, and there's a picture of it. Well, the deal breaker, so the Pope goes back to Rome without a lot to show for it, other than he stood his ground, where he absolutely had to against Napoleon, but he didn't get many rights for the church. And these regulations that now are promulgated are basically that the church can't do anything without the cops or the magistrates saying it's okay. So, the church is allowed to operate, but under very, very tight control, with everything from processions to approval of bishops and all kinds of stuff. It's really, the church is above ground and people like that, but on the other hand, it doesn't have a lot of freedom. It's a church straitjacket. These police regulations are like a real straitjacket for the church, and he wants to do that all throughout his territory. He's amassing more territory through Italy and elsewhere. And the church says, no, we're not. You made these regulations. We do not agree with these. We are not going to abide by this. We're the church, okay? We're established by Jesus Christ, not you. So we're going to, I don't care what you say, we're not going to obey them. And he says, well, then Napoleon is mad at that, but, he's got the police power, especially in France. So he wants the Pope to join the anti-British alliance. So the Brits are his biggest enemies. And the Pope says he wants the Pope to join it and say, look, hey, these are a bunch of Protestants. I mean, why don't you help us? We're good Catholics, fighting against, these Prussians and these Brits. I mean, how about it? Help us out. Pope says, no, I'm not going to help you. No, I mean, I'm neutral. I mean, you want me to be neutral? I mean, these are, Christians too. I mean, I'm not going to get involved. The Pope has to be, above politics. Can't get involved with just your side. So no, we're not going to join the British alliance, anti-British alliance. So he said, okay, well, how about this? Why don't you at least close your ports to any enemies of France, particularly the Brits? Okay, don't want them, bringing their goods. You don't want them refueling. We don't want them getting food in the Papal States. And the Pope says, no. Okay, no. I mean, again, the British have not done a thing wrong to us. In fact, they're starting Catholic emancipation and stuff like that in England now. No, I mean they're even though they don't recognize me have any authority, they're children of God too, and therefore they're children of mine too. So I'm not gonna go against them. I mean, no. So then he said, all right, well then you got to at least relinquish your temporal. If you won't do it because you're some holy Joe, okay, that's one thing, okay. But at least give up temporal power now in Rome. You can still be Pope, you can still have your processions, you can still have your blessings, you can still have your Sunday audiences, but you can't rule Rome. The Pope says, no. No, I mean, this goes all, we got this land all the way back to the time of Pepin, the father of Charlemagne. We're not giving up. We have more right to be here than you do. So now one of the guys that the Pope has is his entourage, his cardinal, is a very sharp and cool guy, Cardinal Consalvi. Okay, and Cardinal Consalvi is your classic urbane, witty, polished, educated guy. He can speak all kinds of languages. He can mix with anybody of any nationality, and entertaining, interesting, and diplomatic. And so Napoleon calls him in and says, you're the foreign minister for the Pope, you're the Secretary of State. I'm going to tell you, you better talk sense to that old man, okay? Because if you don't, I will destroy your church. I will destroy the church. And Cardinal Consalvi says, no, you will not destroy the church. What? You dare say that? I destroyed the Holy Roman Empire. I destroyed the Republic of Venice. I can easily destroy the church. And he says to them the following. If in 1800 years we priests have failed to destroy the church, do you really think that you'll be able to do it? Well, Napoleon knew that he was outsmarted on that one. So so Napoleon decides instead to take direct action. What's the direct action? He tells his general that's in Rome, go get him. And so Rome is seized, invaded, and seized once again, as it had been 10 years before, by the French army. So in May of 1809, they occupy Rome again, and they come and grab the Pope. Okay, and before they grab the Pope says, okay, that's it, I've had enough, you're excommunicated. You're making a pretense of being a Catholic. Now you're barred, even though you don't go to the sacraments, you're barred from the sacraments. So Napoleon says, what does the Pope mean by denouncing me? Does he think that the arms shall fall from the hands of my soldiers? I mean, I got the troops. I got the guns. He can't do anything. He's out of here. And so away he goes. He's taken away. He's arrested. And history begins to repeat itself. He said, oh, you know what, I really didn't want you to arrest the Pope because I saw what happened 10 years ago. And, he becomes a figurehead. I didn't really want that. I wanted you to just kind of take all his cardinals away, all these advisors that are stiffening his spine. But once you've taken him now, let's go through with it. And so once again, as he goes through Italy, long live the Pope, viva il Papa, everybody's saying, come on, we love you, your holiness. And at first, he's exiled to another small town in the south of France called Savona. And Napoleon is sensitive, but he realizes that he can't get all the Catholics of the world, just infuriated with him. So he's got to handle this with some degree of delicacy. So again, he, for a while, allows the Pope to say Mass in Savona. He's basically using the pretense, well, we're in war now. Rome has decided to join our empire. The Pope is still, the Pope, but he can't live in Rome because it's not safe for him there. We got him here under wraps. He's going to be okay. And all kinds of funny things start happening. In papal masses, people start chanting "Tu es Petrus, et porta inferi non prevalebunt." Okay, you are Peter, the gates of hell will not prevail. Okay, and they start chanting it over and over again. Et porta inferi non prevalebunt. Et porta inferi non prevalebunt. It's a chant and it's a song, and they're all singing, "The gates of hell will not prevail." Okay, and so he said, that's got to be it. Okay, so we got to get him out of here. Okay, get him out of here. So they decide, and secretly, at night, they send soldiers in, kind of, commie style. They say, "Your Holiness, you have to leave now." Why? The emperor says you have to leave. We're taking you away, but you can't, wear, your papal clothes. We don't want. This has got to be secret. No, I'm wearing my papal clothes. Okay, and so he does. But they take him in the middle of the night. They take him to a big estate, imperial palace in Fontainebleau. Beautiful garden. Maybe some of you have been there, and. But it's like one of these palaces. There's miles and miles of garden and open ground and around it. So he's going to be locked up there, and he's basically going to be kept in house arrest. So here he is. He's jailed. He's essentially under house arrest, and it increases. Okay, he's first allowed to have some of the cardinals with him, but later they take all the cardinals away. He's just kept there incommunicado. So he doesn't know what's going on. He doesn't know that Napoleon is planning to go to Russia. He doesn't know whether he's winning or losing. I mean, they're telling him that we're taking over Europe. We've got everything. We're going into Russia. We're taking over Russia. But he gets annihilated in Russia. Okay, and indeed, what happens? He didn't account for the Russian winter. Okay, he captured Moscow, but the Ruskies are pretty tough too, as we know. And they, burned Moscow down rather than have him take it over. And with very long supply lines and incredibly, cold temperature, literally his people can't even hold on to their guns. They get frostbite. The guns fall out of their arms. Kind of, God, will not be mocked. And our buddies in Spain, start saying, you know what? Napoleon actually went into Spain and put one of his brothers on the throne of Spain. So this is the new king of Spain, Joseph Bonaparte. Okay, he's going to be your new king. You forget the Bourbons, and and he was a free thinker, like the other, the French intelligentsia. But the Catholics say, no, we don't want any of this. We're Catholics. We want the whole thing. We want our, we believe in Our Lady. We believe in, the Catholic truth. And, we're not going to take this free-thinking nonsense. We're going to fight for what we believe in. And they help, and the Portuguese do too. Wellington lands in Portugal, and with the aid of the Spaniards, who formed their own guerrillas, they paved the way for Wellington's victories, and he ultimately, with a lot of uproar, a lot of fighting from the Spaniards, kicking the French out. They call it the War of Independence. okay, because they returned Spain to the Spaniards. And the Catholics were leading the charge for Wellington. Changed Wellington's mind about Catholics quite a bit. Well, Napoleon now, he's lost in Russia, and so he's got to take, one last shot at it, okay, in January 1813. He tries to pretend he's a good Catholic again. So he wants to meet with the Pope, and now the Pope doesn't even know what's going on, and the Pope is really kept, incredibly incommunicado, so he's almost like a big solitary confinement. I mean, it's not as bad as being in a small cell, okay, because he can walk around the, but he can't really talk to anybody, and so he really doesn't know what's going on, and he's kind of wasting away. So Napoleon meets with him, and he tries to get him to sign deals, basically giving him authority over the church. So he can say that he's the Pope's protector, and he's the Pope's agent. And the Pope is kind of wavering a little bit, and so it's a breaking point for both of them. The Pope doesn't know that Napoleon is on the rocks. He doesn't know that Wellington and the Russians are all moving in on him, and the Prussians. So he's kind of wavering, but Napoleon takes it a bit too far. He said, I'll sign a tentative thing for you, a tentative concordat, but it's not done yet. I mean, in outline, I can agree with a lot of these things for the sake of the church and for the sake of me going back to Rome, but he pushes it too far and he won't sign the final version, and Napoleon then says, oh, well, he publishes the original version, the tentative version, the draft, as though the Pope had already agreed to it, and gets a lot of hay out of that, but it was a lie. Well, of course, ultimately, the Allies come in and they defeat Napoleon, and the first thing they want to do is go into Fontainebleau and get the Pope out of there and bring him back to Rome. So triumphantly, he returns to Rome. He becomes, indeed, a heroic symbol of resistance to tyranny, because if there was anybody that showed that Napoleon was a tyrant and a monster, it was the person of the Pope. Okay, here, this nice guy, this nice little monk to become Pope, wouldn't harm anybody, is nevertheless stood up to Napoleon, and so the Pope's popularity is very, very high. It also creates, with the downfall of Napoleon, a rebirth of the church in France. Now the church is really free, and there is all kinds of people entering. Both religious orders are reestablished. Religious life is back. If you can fix up your church, you can remodel it, and so there's a great deal of missionary expansion, that takes place. A lot of it even led by French people who are so glad to have their religion back. The Pope even had respect even in America. Okay, the United States established diplomatic relations at that time with the Papal States, and the Pope was recognized as someone who had suffered, kind of like like a Cardinal Vincenti, someone who had suffered a lot at the hands of tyranny. I mentioned the missionary expansion, and now on the other hand, what happened to the Bonapartes was especially after Waterloo, after Napoleon's attempt to come back. Nobody wanted the Bonapartes. Okay, Napoleon had an extended family, and they said, we don't want any of your people around here. We let you off at Elba at first, and you pull some stunts a few months later, try to come back. We don't want any of that. You're going to St. Helena, out in the middle of the South Atlantic Ocean, thousands of miles away from Africa, which is the nearest land. That's where you're going to stay. And your people, we don't want anything. Nobody wants anything to do with them. You lost. Okay. And so they can't find a place to stay. The family of Napoleon, his sister, his brothers, nobody will take them. It's sort of like, the Shah of Iran. There's no place you want to put them. There's going to be riots wherever you go. But the Pope says, you know what? They can come to Rome. Nobody wants them. We'll take them. Let them stay in Rome, and we're not going to hassle them. Okay, because after all, he did allow the church to be free in Rome with that Concordat in 1801. That ought to be worth something. And, I just think we ought to do that. So they, this is a kind of an interesting small footnote, this last point. Napoleon's family then lives and dies in Italy, okay, and, nobody's hassling them. They're respected, by the papal authorities, and they're protected. But meanwhile, Napoleon now on St. Helena has absolutely nothing. The Brits play pretty tough, okay, when they want to. They can do it, with a glove, but underneath that glove, they got brass knuckles. If you're going, no matter what you are, if you're fighting the Brits, as the Irishmen can tell you, I mean, they will, they don't play patty cake. Okay, they're tough. They're ruthless, and they're doing it with Napoleon. They said, no, we don't trust this guy. He's an absolute monster. So he gets nothing. Okay, he's on the island. He gets nothing. So they didn't give him any. And we now know that they actually were slowly poisoning him to make sure that he was gone. But he finally, actually, Napoleon writes to the Pope. And so since the Pope had suffered so much, they let his letter to the Pope go through it. And he says, Your Holiness, I would like a priest. Okay, I don't know how much longer I have to live, but I am a Catholic. I would like to die with the benefit of the Catholic religion. I would like to die in the state of grace. The Brits won't allow a priest. Can you get a priest for me? Maybe they'll listen to you. The Pope says to the Brits, can you give him a priest? Come on, I'll send a priest. Well, why? After everything that he did to you and after everything he did to the world, after the hundreds of thousands of people that were killed because of him? He says, I'm the Pope, okay? And yes, I have suffered because of Napoleon, but he's got a soul too. And I want him to have a priest. I will send him a priest if you allow it. So the Brits, all right, Your Holiness, if you want to do it. So Napoleon sends him a priest. I'm sorry. The Pope sends Napoleon a priest, and he dies having received the sacraments. What are the lessons of this crisis 6, which is a biggie? Really bad, okay? Because now, remember, this is years while the Pope is under house arrest. Years when nobody in the Catholic world is hearing from the Pope. Don't know what's going on. Times when the Pope said, it's over, folks. That's all, folks. That's all she wrote. No more Pope. No more any of this. Okay, what are the lessons? The faithful can and will save the church. Not just faithful with a small f. I put it in capital letters. Those who really have the faith. Those who don't give up. People like the Vendéans, people like the Sanfedisti, people like the Spanish guerrillas, okay? People say, no, we're going to be Catholics till the end. We're not going to give up. And ultimately, that leaven causes the loaf to rise. They can save the church, and they will save the church. And the cornerstone rejected, the papacy, cannot be destroyed. One thing this proves is it will not happen, okay? No matter what they throw at the papacy, it is God's rock, okay? And it will not be destroyed. It might seem like it. It might be ragged. It might be jailed. It might be compromised. It might be everything, okay? But in the end, as they even tried to do here, they couldn't do it. The words of Cardinal Consalvi were right. You cannot destroy the church. Weakness in head and members cannot destroy Christ's work, because ultimately it is Christ's work. So the answer is, hold on. No matter how many attacks come, hold on to that faith that you know. Hold on to that faith that comes down to us from the apostles. Hold on. Stand fast, as St. Paul says. Live the faith. Don't just believe in it, but also live it. And realize then that a resurrection follows every Calvary, as it did here. The 19th century was a time of great missionary expansion. After all of this suffering, when the church was all to be wiped out, new nations, new peoples, new countries were added onto the church. And so once again, the divine mercy triumphs. As our Lord said before he died, before he was ascended to heaven, behold, I am with you all days, even to the end of the world. That is the promise of Christ. And of course, Christ cannot deceive because he's incarnate truth and incarnate goodness. We can rely on that even when it seems dark. So whether it's the communists putting Cardinal Mancini in jail, or the Jacobins and the Jacobin sympathizers putting the Pope under house arrest, Christ will ultimately triumph. Christ will be there. Christ will be with us always. We just have to wait for his coming. Like Our Lady, waiting there, knowing that he will rise, and when he rises, we will rise with him. Thank you.